Welcome to Family Betrayal Revenge. Stay tuned. Have a fun time and let's talk in the comment. Let's go!
I'm Sarah, 26. For 2 years, my parents told every employer in town I was a thief. I couldn't get hired anywhere despite graduating with a 3.9 GPA in accounting. I scrubbed hotel toilets while my father laughed. He thought he'd broken me. He didn't know what my grandmother left 15 years ago. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments. And I will give you a heart. Before I explain how a CEO was waiting for me to walk through his door, before I show you the moment my father's face went white in a room full of 200 people, I need you to understand how I ended up scrubbing toilets in a town where everyone knew my name and nobody would hire me. Because if you've ever been sabotaged by the people who are supposed to protect you, if you've ever had your reputation destroyed by someone who smiled at you across the dinner table, you're going to feel this story in your bones. My name is Sarah. I'm 26 years old, and 2 years ago I discovered that my own parents had been actively destroying my career, calling every single employer in our county, telling them I was a thief, telling them I couldn't be trusted with money, telling them not to hire me under any circumstances, and the worst part, the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it, is that they did it because I refused to work for my father for free, because I dared to want independence, because I thought I had the right to build my own life. The Chapman family looked perfect from the outside. We lived in one of those neighborhoods where everyone's lawn is exactly the right shade of green, and the houses have names instead of just numbers. My father, Robert Chapman, owned the largest construction company in our county, Chapman and Sons Development, the kind of company that had built half the commercial buildings downtown and had their logo on job sites all over the region. Our house was a 2-story colonial that sat on 3 manicured acres with a circular driveway and a 4-car garage that held my father's Mercedes, my mother's Lexus, and my older brother Tyler's BMW that he got as a graduation gift for finishing business school. My mother, Patricia, played her role perfectly: the devoted wife, the gracious hostess, Wedgwood china for Sunday dinners, fresh flowers from the farmer's market every single week, a smile that never cracked in public no matter what was happening behind closed doors. She was the woman other wives wanted to be: poised, elegant, always saying the right thing at church socials and charity luncheons, always making sure the family image stayed pristine. And my brother Tyler, for years older than me, he was the golden child, the heir apparent, the one who'd been groomed to take over Dad's company since he was old enough to hold a tape measure. Everything he touched turned to opportunity. Every mistake he made got reframed as a learning experience. Every time he screwed up, Dad would clap him on the shoulder and say, "That's how you learn, son. That's how you build character." Meanwhile, I was held to a completely different standard, a standard that seemed designed to keep me small and dependent and grateful for whatever scraps I was given. Growing up, I learned early, painfully early, that daughters occupied a different place in the Chapman household. We were decorative, we were temporary, we were investments that would eventually be married off to the right family and produce the right kind of grandchildren. When Tyler wanted to study abroad in London for a semester, Dad wrote the check, without even blinking, $15,000 for a program that Tyler barely attended because he spent most of his time in pubs. But when I asked about the same study abroad opportunity 2 years later, asked if I could go to Paris to study international business, my father actually laughed, not a chuckle, a full belly laugh like I'd told the world's funniest joke. "What for?" he said, leaning back in his leather chair in his home office. "You'll get married eventually, probably before you're 30 if you're smart about it. Save me the money, sweetheart. It's not like you need a fancy degree to run a household." I went to State University 40 minutes away, lived at home, commuted every single day in my beat-up Honda Civic that I'd bought myself with money I'd saved from working at the mall in high school, while Tyler had gotten an apartment near his campus, had gotten a car, had gotten a monthly allowance. I got nothing. Every penny I spent had to be justified, every purchase questioned, every expense scrutinized like I was embezzling from the family. At family dinners, and we had them every Sunday without fail, the conversation always orbited around Tyler, his projects at the company, his ideas for expansion, his vision for the future. I would sit at the far end of that long mahogany table, the table that could seat 12 but usually only sat 4, passing dishes and clearing plates while Dad carved the roast and dispensed wisdom to his son like Moses delivering commandments from the mountain. "A man builds his legacy through his work," Dad would say. pointing his fork at Tyler like it was a scepter of authority. "You remember that, son. Everything you build lasts longer than you do. That's how you achieve immortality, through what you create, through what you leave behind." He never pointed that fork at me, never offered me wisdom about building legacies, never asked about my classes or my grades or my dreams. I was wallpaper, I was furniture, I was the daughter who would someday marry well and make the family look good at weddings and christenings. When I was 16, I overheard a conversation that changed how I saw my father forever. I was in the hallway outside the kitchen, about to walk in and ask if I could borrow the car to go to the library, when I heard my parents talking, their voices low but clear enough to carry through the crack in the door. "Daughters don't need to achieve. Patricia," my father was saying, his voice matter-of-fact like he was discussing the weather. "They need to learn how to keep a home, how to manage a household, how to be good wives. Sarah will marry well if we raise her right. That's her job. That's her purpose. We don't need to waste money on fancy education or career training. We need to make sure she's presentable and pleasant and knows her place." I stood frozen in that hallway, my hand still raised to knock, my breath caught somewhere in my throat, and in that moment I understood with perfect clarity that in my father's eyes I wasn't a person with dreams or potential or value beyond what I could bring to a future husband. I was an asset to be managed, a product to be packaged, a transaction waiting to happen. The summer before I started college, my parents did something that seemed generous at the time. They gave me a credit card, a shiny silver card with my name embossed on it, for necessities, my mother said, sliding it across the kitchen table where I was eating cereal before my shift at the mall. "Books, supplies, whatever you need for school, nothing frivolous, but you're covered." Dad nodded from behind his newspaper, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "Don't go crazy, but you're covered. We trust you, Sarah. Just be responsible." I was 18 years old and eager, so desperately eager, to prove that I could handle responsibility, that I could be trusted, that I wasn't the child they still treated me like. So I used that card exactly as intended. Exactly as they'd told me to use it. Textbooks for my accounting courses that cost a fortune because professors always assign the newest edition, a second-hand laptop from the campus technology sale because my old computer from high school was dying, notebooks, calculators, a graphing calculator that cost $85 because it was required for statistics, nothing frivolous, nothing extra, no clothing or entertainment or meals out, just school supplies, just what I needed to succeed. 3 months later, the credit card statement arrived and my father exploded. I remember that night with perfect clarity, the dining room with its chandelier casting sharp shadows, the way my mother's face went pale and tight, the way Tyler smirked from his seat because he loved watching me get in trouble. It validated his position as the golden child. $1,200, Dad was standing now, the statement crumpled in his fist, veins visible in his neck and forehead. "Who gave you permission to spend $1,200? Who told you that you could just spend money, like it grows on trees?" "You did," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted it to, quieter than I needed it to be. "You said I could use it for school supplies. These are school supplies. The books were expensive this semester." "I said necessities," he shouted, slamming the paper onto the table so hard the silverware jumped. "Not a shopping spree. Not an excuse to spend my money like you're some kind of entitled princess." "Gerald," my mother murmured from her seat, but her voice was weak, tentative. "The books really were expensive. I saw the prices." "Stay out of this, Diane," Dad snapped without even looking at her. "This is between me and Sarah. She needs to learn a lesson about money, about responsibility, about respecting what I've worked for." He turned back to me, his eyes cold and hard. "You'll pay back every cent, every single cent of that $1,200, or you can find somewhere else to live. Those are your options. Take your pick." I worked 2 part-time jobs for 8 months straight to pay back that debt. Campus library for 15 hours a week at minimum wage and weekend shifts at a coffee shop near campus where I smelled like espresso and burnt milk for days afterward. I paid back every dollar, kept every receipt in a folder, documented every payment like I was preparing for an audit, made sure he couldn't accuse me of shirking or avoiding or trying to get out of my obligation. But paying back the money wasn't the only cost. Working 25 hours a week while taking classes meant I couldn't handle a full course load. I had to stretch my degree over 6 years instead of 4. 2 extra years of tuition that Dad refused to help with. 2 extra years of living at home and commuting. 2 extra years of being reminded daily that I was a burden, that I was costing him money. that I should be grateful he didn't just throw me out. I thought once I paid it back the debt would be settled, thought he would forget about it, thought we could move past it, but I was wrong. My father had a memory like a steel trap, and he knew exactly how to weaponize the past, how to turn a mistake into a permanent character flaw, how to use one incident to define someone forever. My mother found me crying in my room the night after that confrontation. I was sitting on my bed staring at my textbooks, trying to figure out how I was going to work enough hours to pay him back and still pass my classes. She sat down beside me, stroked my hair the way she used to when I was little, and said something I desperately wanted to believe. "Your father just wants to teach you the value of money, sweetheart," she said softly. "He loves you. He's just strict. Don't be angry with him. He's doing this because he cares, because he wants you to be responsible." I wanted to believe her so badly, wanted to believe that the humiliation and the punishment and the debt were all just tough love, just a father trying to teach his daughter an important lesson. That was my mistake, believing that cruelty could be repackaged as care, believing that control could be disguised as concern. The only person in my family who ever made me feel like I actually mattered, like I had value beyond being someone's future wife, was my grandmother, Margaret Hayes, my mother's mother, and she was nothing like the rest of them. Margaret wasn't soft or sentimental or easy. She built a chain of furniture stores from absolutely nothing. Started with a single showroom in 1972 with money she'd saved working as a secretary, expanded to 11 locations across 3 states, then sold the entire operation when she turned 65 and retired with enough money that she never had to worry about anything again. She was sharp, practical, unsentimental, and she saw things other people missed. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like she could see straight through to your bones, like she understood exactly who you were and what you were capable of. And she watched my father very carefully during family gatherings. I noticed how her eyes would narrow when he dismissed my opinions, how her jaw would tighten when Tyler got praised for mediocre work while my accomplishments went unmentioned, how she would grip her water glass a little tighter when Dad would make jokes about women being bad with money or needing men to make decisions for them. I spent summers with Grandma Margaret when I was young. Her house was this beautiful old Victorian that smelled like lavender sachets and old leather-bound books, and she taught me things my parents never bothered with. She taught me to read financial statements before I was 12 years old, showed me how compound interest worked using her own investment portfolios as examples, explained concepts like asset allocation and risk management while we sat on her porch drinking lemonade. "Knowledge is freedom, Sarah," she would say, tapping her temple with one elegant finger. "No one can take what's in here. They can take your money. They can take your opportunities. They can take your reputation, but they can't take what you know, what you understand, what you've learned. That belongs to you forever." She watched my father very carefully during those family gatherings we'd have at her house for holidays. I noticed the way she studied him when he was talking, the way she would ask pointed questions about his business practices, the way she would raise her eyebrows when he talked about keeping women in their place. One afternoon when I was 15, we were sitting on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. And, out of nowhere, she took my hand and held it tight. "Sarah," she said quietly, seriously, in a tone I'd never heard her use before, "I want you to remember something very important. I've already prepared for your future. When the time comes, and it will come, you'll know, you'll understand." "Prepared what, Grandma?" I asked, confused, not understanding what she meant. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of someone who knew things, who'd seen things, who understood how the world really worked. "Your father can't control everything," she said. "Neither can your mother. Someday you'll need help they won't give you, help they'll actively prevent you from getting, and when that day comes, when you're at your lowest and you think there's no way out, you'll be ready. I've made sure of it." I didn't understand what she meant. I was 15 and naive and still believed that families took care of each other, that parents wanted their children to succeed, that blood meant loyalty. I thought she was being dramatic, being overly cautious, being paranoid about my father in a way that seemed unfair. 3 years ago, Grandma Margaret passed away. She was 78 years old, died peacefully in her sleep, and at her funeral my father gave a eulogy that talked about what a strong woman she was, how she'd built a business empire, how she'd been an inspiration to everyone who knew her. He said all the right words, but they rang hollow. I saw the relief in his eyes that she was gone. Saw the way he relaxed once the funeral was over, like he'd been released from surveillance. I didn't know then, couldn't have known, that she'd left me something far more valuable than money. She'd left me a way out, an escape route, a door that my father couldn't lock no matter how hard he tried. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in accounting, 3.9 GPA, Dean's List every single semester, glowing recommendations from professors who'd worked at places like Deloitte and Ernst & Young. For the first time in my life, I had something that belonged entirely to me, credentials that nobody could dismiss or diminish, proof on paper that I was competent and capable and worth hiring. The graduation ceremony was on a Saturday in May. I walked across that stage in my cap and gown, diploma in hand, and I scanned the audience for my family. They were there, sitting in the third row, but they weren't watching me. Dad and Mom were flanking Tyler, all three of them deep in conversation about something, heads together, laughing. When my name was called over the speakers, only a few strangers clapped politely. My own family didn't even look up. Afterward, Dad found me in the parking lot where I was taking photos with some classmates. He walked over with his hands in his pockets, looking like he was about to deliver good news. "Nice job, kiddo," he said in the same tone he used when complimenting the mailman on being on time. "Listen, I've got a proposition for you. Come work at the company. We need someone to handle the books, do the accounting work. You'd be perfect for it." My heart actually lifted for half a second. Maybe he finally sees my value. Maybe this is the moment he acknowledges that I worked hard, that I achieved something worth recognizing. The position would be unpaid for the first year. He continued casually, "Considered an apprenticeship, a training period. You'll live at home, obviously, help your mother with household things, learn the business from the ground up, and then in a few years, when Tyler takes over officially, you'll be in a good position to support him. You'll be useful." Unpaid, living at home, position to support my brother, useful, not valued, not respected, not compensated, useful. I took a breath and made a decision that would change everything. "I appreciate the offer, Dad," I said carefully, "but I'd like to try finding work on my own first, get some outside experience, see what's out there, build my resume with different companies." His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes went Arctic cold. Something shifted that I didn't recognize until much later. "Fine," he said softly, dangerously. "Try it your way, see how that works out for you." He turned and walked back toward the car where Mom and Tyler were waiting. None of them looked back at me, not once. I stood alone in that parking lot holding my diploma, and I told myself I'd made the right choice, told myself that independence was worth the risk. I had no idea, absolutely no idea, that his softly spoken fine was actually a declaration of war, that in that moment he'd decided to destroy me, and that the next 2 years would be the hardest of my entire life. But what I also didn't know was that my grandmother had seen this coming 15 years earlier, and she'd already put something in place that would save me when I needed it most. The rejection letters started coming within 2 weeks of graduation, fast enough that I thought maybe I'd done something wrong in my applications. Maybe my resume had typos I didn't catch. Maybe my cover letters sounded too desperate or too confident or somehow wrong in a way I couldn't identify. First came Miller and Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm downtown that specialized in small business clients. I'd interviewed beautifully, I knew I had. The hiring manager had smiled warmly, shaken my hand with both of his, told me my qualifications were impressive and that they'd be in touch very soon, probably by the end of the week. I'd walked out of that office feeling like I'd finally done something right, like maybe independence was actually possible. 2 days later, the email arrived. "Thank you for your interest in Miller and Associates. After careful consideration, we've decided to move forward with another candidate. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." I applied to Regional Commerce Bank next. They had an opening for a junior accountant in their audit department. The interview went well, I thought. The woman who interviewed me asked smart questions and seemed pleased with my answers. She walked me out herself, told me I'd hear back within a week. 6 days later, same email, different company name. Then Valley Insurance Group, same result, great interview, warm reception, followed by silence, and then a form rejection email that probably got sent to 50 other applicants. Patterson Property Management, rejected. Riverside Medical Billing, rejected. Community Credit Union, rejected. Within 6 weeks, I'd applied to 15 different positions, gotten 15 interviews, received 15 rejections, and I started doing what people do when the world keeps telling them no. I started believing that maybe the world was right. Maybe something was wrong with me. Maybe I wasn't as qualified as I thought. Maybe my degree didn't mean what I thought it meant. Maybe I was delusional about my own abilities. I spent my nights in my childhood bedroom revising my resume for the 20th time, changing fonts, rewording bullet points, practicing interview answers in front of my mirror until I hated the sound of my own voice, reading career advice articles on websites with names like jobsuccess.com and careerboost.org, trying everything, changing everything, hoping that if I just adjusted the right variable, the equation would finally work out in my favor. Nothing changed. The rejections kept coming, each one worded slightly differently but delivering the same message. You're not what we're looking for. You're not good enough. Go away. 3 months after graduation, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when Tyler walked in. He'd stopped by the house to pick something up from Dad. He looked at me with this expression that was half pity and half smugness. Still unemployed? He asked, opening the fridge and grabbing an energy drink. Yeah, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Tough market out there, he said, not sounding like he thought it was tough at all. Maybe you should take Dad up on his offer. Come work for us. It's not like you have other options. I have options, I said. I'm still applying. He laughed, not meanly exactly, but not kindly either. Whatever you say, sis. Let me know when you're ready to be realistic. One afternoon in late August, I walked into Patterson Financial Services for what felt like my 20th interview. I was tired, burned out, starting to feel like I was going through motions that didn't matter, but I needed a job desperately. My savings were running out, and my father had started making comments about charging me rent if I didn't find employment soon. The HR manager was a woman in her 50s named Helen Morrison. She had kind eyes and a gentle voice, and she listened to my answers with what seemed like genuine interest. We talked about my coursework, my internship experience, my goals for the future, and then something shifted. Her expression changed. Her eyes went from warm to troubled, like she'd just remembered something unpleasant. Miss Chapman, she said slowly, carefully, like she was choosing each word with precision. I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't tell you, something that could get me in trouble if anyone found out. My stomach dropped. Here it comes, I thought. Here's where she tells me I'm not qualified, that my education wasn't rigorous enough, that I don't have enough experience. You seem like a lovely young woman, she continued, qualified, professional, exactly the kind of person we'd normally be thrilled to hire, but there's a problem, and it's not with you. What problem? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I think you should talk to your father, she said, and she wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. I can't say more than that. I could lose my job, but you need to ask him. Ask him why no one in this town will hire you. My hands started shaking. I clasped them together in my lap to hide it. What are you saying? Miss Chapman, she said, standing up to signal the interview was over. Every company in this county talks to each other. We all know each other. We all share information. And there's information circulating about you that you need to be aware of. Talk to your father. Ask him what he's been telling people. I drove home with my hands trembling on the steering wheel, a cold certainty forming in my chest like ice crystallizing around my heart. Something I didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. My father had done something, said something, and suddenly all those rejections made terrible perfect sense. That evening I found him in his study, the same mahogany-paneled room where he'd accused me of theft over textbooks. He was sitting behind his imported English desk with a glass of scotch sweating on a leather coaster beside him, reading through some contract or invoice or business document. Dad, I said from the doorway, I need to talk to you. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me beyond a slight movement of his hand that meant make it quick. Why can't I get a job? That question made him look up, made him set down his pen. And in that moment, in the half-second before he arranged his face into an expression of concern, I saw it. Satisfaction, pleasure, the look of someone who'd executed a plan perfectly. What do you mean, sweetheart? He asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I've applied everywhere, I said, every accounting firm, every bank, every insurance company, everywhere that needs someone with my qualifications, and I get great interviews, but then nothing, rejection after rejection, and today someone actually had the decency to tell me that there's information circulating about me, information you would know about. He leaned back in his leather chair, picked up his scotch glass, swirled it slowly. Did they now? He said, not a question, a statement. You called them, I said, and my voice was shaking now. You called all of them, every single place I applied, didn't you? He took a sip of his scotch, maintaining eye contact, letting the silence stretch out until it became unbearable. I told them the truth, he said finally, casually, like he was discussing the weather forecast. What truth? That you're a thief. He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, that for a second I thought I'd misheard him, that you stole $1,200 from your own family, that you can't be trusted with money, that any employer who hires you should know exactly what kind of person they're dealing with. The room tilted. The floor seemed to drop away beneath my feet. I paid that back, I said, every cent, I paid it back, that was for textbooks you told me to buy.
Did you?
He shrugged, taking another sip. That's not how I remember it, and even if you did pay it back, which I'm not sure you did, that doesn't change the fact that you stole it in the first place. Dad, I whispered because I couldn't manage volume anymore. Those were school supplies. You gave me permission. What I remember, he interrupted, and his voice went hard now, is my daughter stealing from me, taking advantage of my generosity, spending my money without any regard for what it cost, what I had to do to earn it, and I think potential employers deserve to know what kind of person they'd be hiring, don't you? I think they deserve to know the truth. My mother appeared in the doorway behind me. She must have been listening from the hallway. Her hands were twisted together in front of her, ringing like she was trying to wring out the tension. Guilt flickered across her face for just a moment before she buried it. Gerald, she said softly, maybe we should. Maybe this has gone far enough. Diane, my father said without looking at her, this is between me and Sarah. This doesn't concern you. She flinched like he'd slapped her. Her eyes met mine for just a second, and I saw it clearly. She knew this was wrong. She knew he was destroying me. She knew, and she was choosing to look away, choosing silence over defending her own daughter, and somehow that hurt worse than Dad's cruelty. He was a monster, but I'd always known that. She was supposed to be different, supposed to be safe. I stared at my father, tears burning behind my eyes, but refusing to fall because I wouldn't give him that satisfaction.
Why?
I asked. Why would you do this to me? He stood slowly, deliberately, walked around his desk and stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell the scotch on his breath, close enough that I could see the coldness in his eyes. Because you needed to learn respect, he said quietly, almost gently, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. You turned down my offer. You thought you could make it without this family, without my help, without me. You thought you were better than us. I'm not, I started to say, but he held up a hand. Maybe now, he said, you understand, you can't do this alone, you need me, you need this family, and the sooner you accept that and come home, come work for me on my terms, the sooner all of this goes away, the sooner I make some calls and tell people I was mistaken, that you've learned your lesson. Come home, Mom whispered from the doorway. Work for your father. This can all go away. Everything can go back to normal. I looked between them, my father's satisfied smile, my mother's pleading, desperate expression, and I understood with perfect clarity what this was really about. This wasn't about respect or responsibility or teaching me lessons. This was about control, about making sure I couldn't exist outside his influence, about punishing me for wanting independence. In a small town like ours, gossip travels faster than truth, faster than facts, faster than reality. Within 2 weeks of that confrontation, I felt the shift everywhere I went. At the grocery store, neighbors who'd known me since childhood suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. They'd turn down different aisles when they saw me coming, study their shopping lists with intense concentration when I walked past. At church, where my family had attended for 20 years, conversations would stop mid-sentence when I entered a room. Women who used to ask about my studies would smile tightly and find excuses to walk away. I'd hear whispers trailing behind me like smoke. Did you hear about the Chapman girl? Such a shame, really. The family's been so good to her. They tried to help, tried to give her opportunities, but she just wouldn't listen. Stealing from your own parents. Can you imagine? My father had been strategic about it, brilliantly, cruelly strategic. He hadn't just called employers. He'd seeded the story throughout his entire network. Golf buddies at the country club, business associates at Chamber of Commerce meetings, neighbors at dinner parties, colleagues at church. Everywhere he went, he told his version. Troubled daughter, theft problem, family trying their best to cope with disappointment. He never lied outright. That was the genius of it. He just told his truth. His version where the $1,200 credit card incident became theft, where my attempts at independence became ingratitude, where my desire for my own career became rejection of family values, and in a town where Chapman and Sons had built half the commercial real estate, where my father sat on the hospital board and the school board and the planning commission, his version was the only version that mattered. Tyler made it worse. He always made things worse. I ran into him at the downtown coffee shop one morning, one of my old part-time jobs from college. He was there with friends, guys I vaguely recognized from his fraternity days. They were laughing loudly, taking up 3 tables they'd pushed together, making the whole place smell like expensive cologne and entitlement. "Hey, little sister," Tyler called out when he saw me, loud enough for everyone in the coffee shop to hear. "Still looking for work? I heard Dad might have an opening for you." Oh wait, he paused for dramatic effect. "You'd probably steal from the register." His friends erupted in laughter. I felt every eye in that coffee shop turn toward me, felt the weight of judgment from strangers who didn't know me but knew my father's story. I left my coffee order on the counter and walked out with my face burning, hearing their laughter follow me onto the street. At home that night, I sat on my bed and looked at my bank account on my phone. $3,000 in savings. That's what I'd left after 6 months of unemployment. Rent wasn't due because I was living at home, but Dad had started charging me $200 a month for food and utilities, said it was important I learn responsibility. I had maybe 2 more months, maybe 3 if I stretched it, before I'd be completely broke, completely dependent, completely out of options, before I'd have no choice but to crawl back to my father's office and accept whatever terms he offered, whatever conditions he imposed. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't let that happen, but I was running out of time and running out of options and running out of hope. The Willow Creek Inn sat on the edge of town near the highway exit. It was a modest hotel, nothing fancy, the kind of place that catered to traveling salespeople and families visiting relatives or passing through on road trips. The sign in the parking lot said Willow Creek Inn, vacancy, free Wi-Fi, and the paint on the exterior was faded from years of sun and weather. The job listing I found online said housekeeping staff needed, no experience necessary, no references required, and those last 3 words made my chest tight with something between relief and shame. No references required meant they weren't going to call my father, weren't going to hear his lies, weren't going to judge me before I even walked in the door. I applied at 2 in the morning when the shame felt less sharp, when I could pretend I was applying for temporary work while I kept looking for real opportunities, when I could lie to myself that this was just a stepping stone and not a surrender. 2 days later, I was standing in the employee break room of the Willow Creek and filling out paperwork with a pen that barely worked while a manager named Linda Crawford watched me with tired, skeptical eyes. She was maybe mid-40s. Wearing a polo shirt with the hotel logo and khakis that had seen better days. She looked like someone who'd heard every sob story and seen every type of hard luck case walk through her door. She picked up my application from the desk, scanned it quickly. "Accounting degree," she said flatly, "GPA 3.9, Dean's List, and you want to clean hotel rooms." "Yes, ma'am," I said.
Why?
I could have lied, could have made up something about wanting experience in hospitality management, about planning to work my way up, about being passionate about customer service. But I was so tired of lies, so exhausted from maintaining pretenses, and something about Linda's direct gaze made me think she'd see through any story I tried to tell. "Because no one else will hire me," I said, the truth falling out my mouth before I could stop it. "And I need to eat, I need to survive, and this is the only place that didn't require references." She studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I waited for her to ask why no one would hire me, waited for her to reach for her phone to call someone, to verify my background, to hear my father's version, and send me away like everyone else had. Instead, she nodded once, reached into a cabinet, and pulled out a folded uniform, pale blue polyester that looked like it would wrinkle if you breathed on it too hard. "I don't care what people say about you, Miss Chapman," she said, handing me the uniform. "I don't care about rumors or gossip or what your family claims you did or didn't do. I care whether you show up on time and do your job. Can you do that?" "Yes," I whispered, throat tight. "Shift starts at 6 a.m., she said. "Don't be late. It's minimum wage. It's night shifts. It's hard work, but it's honest work and nobody's going to judge you here. We've all got stories." "Thank you," I managed to say. "You won't regret this." "We'll see," she said, but there was something almost kind in her eyes. Minimum wage, night shifts, scrubbing toilets and changing sheets and cleaning up after people who would never know my name or care about my degree, while people who used to respect me pretended not to see me in the hallways, pretended they didn't recognize me when I pushed my cleaning cart past them. It wasn't what I'd imagined when I walked across that graduation stage, but it was work, it was survival. It was something my father couldn't control or take away, and that had to be enough. 6 months into my housekeeping job at the Willow Creek Inn, something happened that I should have expected but somehow didn't see coming. My family decided to have dinner at the hotel restaurant, and I stopped believing in coincidences after that night. It was a Friday evening. I was pushing my supply cart down the service corridor on the second floor, getting ready to clean rooms after the early checkout rush. When I heard a laugh I recognized instantly, my father's booming, self-satisfied bark that he used when he was feeling particularly pleased with himself, when he closed a deal or won an argument or gotten exactly what he wanted. I froze mid-step, pressed myself against the wall, peered carefully around the corner toward the lobby area. And there they were, my entire family, being seated in the hotel restaurant by the hostess who probably had no idea she was witnessing a carefully orchestrated cruelty. Dad was wearing his charcoal Tom Ford suit, the one he reserved for important meetings. Mom had on her pearls and a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. Tyler was checking his phone with that bored expression he wore whenever he was forced to spend time with the family. The hostess was leading them to a window table, a booth with leather seats and a view of the parking lot and the highway beyond, and that table had a direct sight line to the service corridor where I was standing, where I would have to walk past if I was going to do my job, where they would absolutely see me in my wrinkled polyester uniform with my yellow rubber gloves and my cleaning cart. I should have stayed hidden, should have radioed Linda and asked her to assign someone else to that floor, should have found a different hallway or a storage closet or anywhere that wasn't visible from their table. But before I could move, before I could hide, my father's eyes found me across the lobby, found me in my uniform with my cart, found me doing the exact job he'd forced me into, and his face split into the widest grin I'd ever seen, genuine pleasure radiating from him like heat. Well, he said loudly, nudging my mother's shoulder with his elbow, pointing directly at me across the restaurant. Diane, look, our daughter found her calling. Mom's face flickered with something, shame maybe, or discomfort, or the ghost of maternal instinct that should have made her stop this. But she didn't stop it. She looked at me, and then looked away quickly like I was something embarrassing she didn't want to acknowledge. Hey, Sarah, Tyler called out, even louder than Dad, loud enough that every single diner in that restaurant turned to look at us. Missed a spot in room 204. Better get on that before you get fired from this job, too. Several people turned to stare. Some of them recognized me. I saw recognition dawn on their faces, followed by that particular expression people get when they see someone they used to respect doing work they consider beneath them, a mixture of pity and satisfaction, and thank God that's not me. I stood there in the service corridor holding my toilet brush, while my family sat at their white tablecloth table with their crystal water glasses and their leather-bound menus and their Rolex watches and Italian leather shoes. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, couldn't have been more intentional. They'd come here on purpose, had chosen this hotel specifically, had timed it perfectly to maximize my humiliation. My father raised his wine glass toward me in a mock toast, held it up like he was saluting me, like he was acknowledging some great achievement. Maybe now, he said, just loud enough for his voice to carry across the restaurant, you'll finally learn to respect us. Maybe now you understand that you need family, that you can't make it alone. I didn't cry. I refused to cry. I didn't run or hide or fall apart the way he wanted me to. I just turned around slowly and pushed my cleaning cart back down the corridor. But something hardened inside me that night. Something crystallized from liquid to solid, from doubt to certainty. And I remembered what Grandma Margaret had said all those years ago on her porch. When the time comes, you'll know. When the time comes, you'll be ready. I wondered if this was the time. Wondered if I was ready. Wondered if somewhere out there was the help she'd promised, the escape route she'd prepared, because I couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep surviving in this suspended state of humiliation and poverty, couldn't keep watching my father win, and what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have known, was that 3 weeks later I would find something in an old phone that would change everything, that would lead me to a man who'd been waiting for me for 15 years. That would reveal exactly what my grandmother had prepared and why my father's satisfaction was about to turn into something very different. 3 weeks after the restaurant incident, I was in my childhood bedroom trying to figure out what I could sell to make next month's rent, going through boxes of old things I'd accumulated over the years. Textbooks I'd kept thinking I might need them for reference, clothes that didn't fit anymore, jewelry I'd gotten for birthdays and never worn, anything that might be worth a few dollars on Facebook Marketplace or at a consignment shop. That's when I found my old phone, the one I'd used during my last year of college, tucked in the back of my desk drawer underneath a stack of notebooks. The screen was cracked from when I dropped it on campus. The battery was completely dead. I'd upgraded to a new phone about a year ago and had just tossed this one in a drawer and forgotten about it. Never bothered to transfer the data or check for anything important because I'd assumed everything I needed was already in the cloud or on my new device. For some reason, probably desperation, probably the kind of irrational hope that makes you check coat pockets and old purses for forgotten cash, I plugged it into the charger, the ancient charging cable that barely fit anymore because phone companies kept changing their connectors to force you to buy new accessories, and I waited while it powered up, watching that battery icon slowly fill with green. The phone buzzed to life after about 10 minutes. The screen lit up with notifications that had been waiting for years. Old text messages from college friends I'd lost touch with, spam emails about student loan refinancing, app updates that were no longer relevant. I started scrolling through them mechanically, deleting things, when I saw it, one voicemail from 3 years ago, from right after Grandma Margaret died. The date stamp was from the week of her funeral. My heart started pounding before I even knew why, before my conscious brain had caught up with what my instincts already understood. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear with a hand that was suddenly shaking. "Miss Chapman," a man's voice said, professional, measured, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who handled important matters with care. "This is Walter Henderson from Henderson and Associates law firm. I'm calling regarding the estate of Margaret Hayes. There are some documents pertaining to her that require your immediate attention. They're quite time-sensitive and quite significant. Please contact our office at your earliest possible convenience. We've attempted to reach you several times without success." The message ended with a phone number that I immediately scribbled on the back of an envelope. I sat on my bed staring at that number, trying to understand what it meant, trying to remember that time 3 years ago right after Grandma died. I remembered being in a fog of grief, remembered barely functioning for weeks, remembered not checking voicemails or emails because everything felt meaningless without her, remembered my father handling all the estate details, remembered him telling us at the funeral reception that Grandma had left everything to charity with small token gifts for family members. Nothing significant, he'd said dismissively, waving his hand like it was barely worth mentioning. Your grandmother was always sentimental but not particularly practical. There are a few personal items but no real money. It all went to her favorite causes. I'd believed him, had no reason not to believe him, had assumed that Grandma had done what a lot of wealthy older people do, left her money to hospitals and scholarships and animal shelters, things that mattered to her, and I'd been fine with that because the money didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd lost the only person in my family who'd ever truly seen me. But now, staring at this voicemail from a lawyer saying there were significant time-sensitive documents that required my attention, documents I'd never seen, calls I'd never returned, I felt something cold and dark uncoil in my stomach. I grabbed my current phone and dialed Henderson and Associates. It was late on a Friday afternoon. I didn't expect anyone to answer, but a receptionist picked up on the second ring. "Henderson and Associates, how may I direct your call?" "I'm trying to reach Walter Henderson," I said, my voice coming out more breathless than I intended. "He contacted me about 3 years ago regarding my grandmother's estate, Margaret Hayes. I never got the message until today, and I need to speak with him." There was a pause, the sound of typing, keyboard clicks that seemed too loud through the phone. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the receptionist said, and her voice had shifted from professional to sympathetic. "Mr. Henderson retired last year due to health issues. His cases were transferred to various attorneys within the firm and partner firms in the area." Another pause, more typing. "I see a note here that Mr. Henderson attempted to reach you multiple times. The file indicates the calls went unanswered, and eventually your father, Robert Chapman, contacted our office directly and informed us that you, the beneficiary, were not interested in pursuing the matter further. that you declined any inheritance and didn't wish to be contacted again. The room spun. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. My father said what? I'm just reading the notes in the system. Ma'am, she said carefully. It says here that family representative Robert Chapman confirmed beneficiary declined further contact. The file was closed and the case was transferred to... She paused. I'd need to look into our records to see where exactly it was transferred. Can I take your contact information and have someone call you back? I gave her my number, my email, my address, everything I could think of, but I knew even as I was doing it that I wouldn't hear back. Knew that the trail had gone cold years ago. Knew that my father had intercepted something, had cut me off from something, had told lawyers I wasn't interested when I'd never even known there was anything to be interested in. After I hung up, I sat on my bed for a long time, my old phone in one hand with that voicemail still saved, my current phone in the other with the law firm's number on the screen, trying to process what I'd just learned, trying to understand the implications. Grandma Margaret had left me something significant enough that a lawyer had called multiple times, something time-sensitive, something that my father had actively intercepted and hidden from me, something he'd made sure I would never know about. I thought about Grandma's words on that porch 15 years ago. I've already prepared for your future. When the time comes, you'll know. She'd known even then, had known what kind of man my father was, had known he would try to control me, and she'd prepared something, left something, created some kind of safety net that he'd found and destroyed before I even knew it existed. That night at dinner, a tense, silent affair where Tyler was scrolling through his phone and Mom was pushing food around her plate pretending everything was fine. I looked at my father and saw him differently, saw him not just as a controlling parent, but as someone who'd actively stolen from me, who'd intercepted legal documents, who'd impersonated me to lawyers, who'd committed what had to be some kind of fraud to keep me from accessing something Grandma had left me. I wanted to confront him right there, wanted to slam my hand on the table and demand answers, but something stopped me, some instinct that said confrontation would get me nowhere, that he'd just deny everything or twist it around or find some way to make it my fault. So I stayed quiet, finished my dinner, excused myself, and went to my room to plan. Over the next month I searched. I called every law firm in 3 counties, asked about Margaret Hayes' estate, asked if they had any records, asked if they'd handled any transfers from Henderson and Associates. I got nowhere. The trail was completely cold. Files had been closed, records had been archived. And nobody wanted to help some random woman calling about a 3-year-old estate case that had been marked as declined by the beneficiary. I applied to jobs outside our county, places far enough away that my father's reputation wouldn't reach, places where the Chapman name meant nothing. I sent applications to cities I'd never visited, Chicago, Denver, Atlanta, Phoenix, anywhere that was far enough to be safe from his influence. The rejections kept coming. Some companies wanted references I couldn't provide. Others questioned the 2-year gap in my employment history. How do you explain on a resume that your father sabotaged your career, that you were blackballed from an entire industry, that you've been scrubbing toilets because it was the only place that would take you? I tried honesty a few times, tried explaining in cover letters that I'd faced family difficulties, that there had been circumstances beyond my control, but HR managers didn't want complicated family situations, didn't want drama, didn't want to take risks on candidates who came with asterisks and footnotes and explanations that sounded like excuses. After 6 weeks of constant applications and constant rejections, I was ready to give up, ready to accept that I was trapped, that my father had won, that I would spend the rest of my life cleaning hotel rooms and living in his house and slowly disappearing into the life he designed for me. And then the email arrived, subject line interview invitation, Mercer Holdings. I had to read it 3 times before I believed it was real, before I allowed myself to think it might not be spam or a mistake or some cruel joke. Dear Miss Chapman, the email began, we have reviewed your application for the junior accountant position and would like to invite you for an in-person interview at our headquarters in the city. Please note that this interview will be conducted by our CEO, Mr. Daniel Mercer, personally. This is an unusual request, but Mr. Mercer has expressed specific interest in meeting with you based on your qualifications and background. Please confirm your availability at your earliest convenience. Mercer Holdings. I pulled up their website on my laptop, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type. They were huge, one of the largest financial management firms in 3 states, the kind of company that managed billions in assets, that had offices in major cities, that was way above my experience level, way out of my league. I'd applied on a whim weeks ago, had assumed I'd never hear back, had forgotten I'd even sent them my resume. And the CEO wanted to meet me personally. That didn't make sense. CEOs didn't interview entry-level accountants. CEOs didn't conduct interviews at all except maybe for senior executive positions. Something about this felt wrong, felt off, felt like it had to be a mistake. I almost deleted the email, almost convinced myself it was a scam, some elaborate phishing scheme designed to steal my identity or get my bank information, but something made me pause, some memory of Grandma's voice. When the time comes, you'll know. When you're at your lowest, when you think there's no way out, you'll be ready. I hit reply before I could talk myself out of it, before logic could override the desperate hope that was surging through my chest. Dear Sir or Madam, I am available at your earliest convenience. Please let me know what date and time works best. Thank you for this opportunity. 2 days later, I was on a Greyhound bus heading to the city, wearing a second-hand navy suit I'd found at Goodwill for $47, with exactly $63 in my wallet and absolutely no idea what was waiting for me. I'd told Linda at the hotel that I needed a day off for a family emergency. She looked at me with those knowing eyes and pressed a crumpled $20 bill into my hand. Go get your life back. She'd said, you don't belong here, Sarah. You never did. Go get what's yours. The bus ride took 3 hours. I spent the entire time rehearsing interview answers, practicing my smile in the reflection of the window, trying to prepare for every possible question. Tell me about yourself. I'm a recent graduate with a degree in accounting and a strong work ethic. Why do you want to work at Mercer Holdings? Your company's reputation for integrity aligns with my values. Why is there a 2-year gap in your employment? That one I practiced 10 different ways and none of them sounded right. None of them captured the truth without sounding crazy or bitter or damaged. I checked into a budget motel near the bus station the night before the interview. $29 for a room that smelled like industrial cleaner and cigarette smoke. The mattress sagged in the middle. The TV didn't work. The shower had rust stains. But it was mine. It was private. And tomorrow might change everything or might be just another rejection in a long line of rejections. Either way, I needed to be ready. I hung my Goodwill suit in the bathroom and ran the shower hot, letting the steam work out the wrinkles. I polished my only pair of professional heels, black pumps with scuffs on the toes that I'd tried to cover with a Sharpie. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. to give myself plenty of time to look presentable, to look like someone worth hiring, to look like I deserved to be in the same building as a CEO who ran a billion-dollar company. That night as I lay in that sagging motel bed staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to traffic on the highway and voices from other rooms, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. My father's cruelty, my mother's silence, Tyler's mockery, 2 years of rejection and humiliation and surviving on minimum wage. And I thought about Grandma Margaret, about her promise, about the lawyer's voicemail, about the inheritance my father had stolen, about the fact that somehow, impossibly, I had an interview with a CEO who wanted to meet me personally. Something was happening, something bigger than a job interview. I could feel it the way you feel a storm coming before you see the clouds. The way you know something important is about to change. I didn't know what it was, couldn't guess what was waiting for me in that office building, but I knew with absolute certainty that tomorrow my life would be different, would shift in a direction I couldn't predict. And I also knew that whatever Grandma had prepared 15 years ago, whatever she'd left me that my father had tried to hide, I was about to find out. I was about to walk through a door she'd opened before I even knew I needed it. And my father, who'd spent 2 years destroying me, who'd thought he'd broken me into submission, who'd celebrated my humiliation in that hotel restaurant, he had no idea what was coming. No idea that the daughter he'd tried to crush was about to discover she'd never been as powerless as he'd made her believe. The morning of my interview, my phone rang at 6 a.m., jolting me awake from the kind of sleep that doesn't really count as rest. I was already dressed, had been awake since 4:30 running through scenarios and worst-case outcomes. I looked at the caller ID, and my stomach dropped straight through the sagging motel mattress. Dad. My thumb hovered over the ignore button, every instinct screaming at me to just let it go to voicemail, to not give him the satisfaction of knowing he could still reach me, still affect me, still make my pulse spike with just his name on a screen. But something made me answer. Maybe curiosity, maybe the kind of self-destructive impulse that makes you touch a bruise just to see if it still hurts. Sarah, his voice was flat, cold, stripped of any pretense of fatherly concern. I hear you have an interview today. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. How do you know that? Tyler follows your social media accounts, he said, casual, like this was normal, like surveillance was just what families did. You were very careless posting that you bought a bus ticket to the city. Very sloppy tagging your location at the bus station. He did some research, cross-referenced which financial firms were hiring in that area, made some calls, wasn't hard to figure out. I'd made one post, one single Instagram story about new beginnings and fresh starts, hadn't mentioned the company name, hadn't given any details, but I tagged the bus station like an idiot, and Tyler had used that information like a bloodhound tracking a scent. I'd handed them the ammunition to destroy this too. It doesn't matter, Dad, I said, trying to sound confident, trying to sound like I wasn't standing in a motel room in a Goodwill suit with $63 to my name. This interview is none of your business. I know people in finance, Sarah, he said, letting that hang in the air like a threat, like a noose. The industry is smaller than you think. People talk, people share information, people want to know who they're hiring, and I'd hate for them to make a mistake, hate for them to hire someone with your history. You wouldn't, I whispered, but I knew he would, knew he already had, knew that right now somewhere in that city a phone call was probably being made, a story was probably being told, my father's version of reality was probably already spreading like poison through whatever network he'd tapped into. Try me, he said, or better yet, come home right now, get on the next bus, stop this foolishness. Come work for me like you should have done 2 years ago, last chance, Sarah. This is me being generous. This is me offering you a way out before you embarrass yourself again. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. I glanced at it while my father was still talking. It was from Tyler. Just 2 sentences that made my vision blur with rage. You're done, sis. Dad already called them. Enjoy the bus ride home, loser. I was standing in that terrible motel room 50 feet from the building where my interview was supposed to happen, where my one chance at escape was waiting, and my father was trying to burn it down from 300 miles away, was reaching across state lines to destroy the one opportunity I'd gotten in 2 years. I looked up at the Mercer Holdings tower visible through the grimy motel window, 26 floors of glass and steel reflecting the morning sun, and I had a choice. I could believe my father had already won, could turn around and go home defeated, could accept that I would never escape his control, or I could walk into that building and face whatever was waiting, could refuse to surrender until I had actual proof that this door had closed like all the others. I silenced my phone, cutting off my father mid-sentence, blocked both his number and Tyler's. I didn't need to hear any more. Didn't need their poison in my head while I was trying to fight for my future, and I walked out of that motel room into the morning light with my second-hand suit and my scuffed shoes and my grandmother's voice in my head telling me that somewhere, somehow, she'd prepared for this, and I needed to believe that her preparation was stronger than my father's destruction. The lobby of Mercer Holdings was everything my life wasn't. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, a 3-story atrium with modern art installations suspended from the ceiling on near-invisible cables, men and women in designer suits moving with purpose toward banks of elevators, their heels clicking rhythms that sounded like success and confidence and belonging. I felt like an imposter in my Goodwill clothes, felt like security would stop me any second and ask what someone like me was doing in a place like this. I approached the reception desk, a sleek curved piece of architecture more than furniture, and the receptionist looked up from her computer. She was young, maybe my age, wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly hotel wages. Her makeup was perfect, her hair was perfect. Everything about her screamed competence and professional polish. Sarah Chapman, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking, I have an interview scheduled. She typed something, her perfectly manicured nails clicking on the keyboard. Then her expression changed, shifted from polite professionalism to something I couldn't quite read, something that might have been surprise or might have been recognition. Yes, Miss Chapman, she said, you're expected. Mr. Mercer will see you personally in his office on the 26th floor. Her pause was loaded with meaning I didn't understand. Take the private elevator on your left. His assistant will meet you when you arrive. The private elevator, The CEO's floor. That didn't make sense. None of this made sense. CEOs didn't interview entry-level candidates, didn't conduct first-round screenings, didn't personally meet with anyone below senior management unless something very unusual was happening. I wanted to ask if there'd been a mistake, if maybe I was supposed to meet with HR first, with a hiring manager, with literally anyone other than the person who ran the entire company, but I just nodded and walked toward the elevator she'd indicated, my heels clicking too loudly on that perfect marble floor. The elevator was smaller than the main bank, paneled in dark wood with brass fixtures that looked antique and expensive. I pressed the button for the 26th floor and watched the numbers climb, trying to breathe normally, trying to prepare for whatever was about to happen, trying to ignore the voice in my head that said my father had already destroyed this, that I was walking into another humiliation, another rejection. Another lesson about knowing my place. The doors opened onto a reception area that screamed wealth in that quiet, understated way that only real money can achieve. Original artwork on the walls, not prints but actual paintings with texture and depth. Furniture that looked handcrafted by people who understood wood and form. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city that made my breath catch because I'd never seen anything that beautiful from that high up. An assistant in a charcoal dress approached. She was older than the lobby receptionist, maybe mid-30s, and she smiled at me with something that looked almost like kindness. "Miss Chapman," she said, "Mr. Mercer is waiting for you." She gestured down a hallway lined with photographs showing the company's history, I guessed, black and white images of buildings and people and milestones. We stopped at a heavy oak door, and she paused with her hand on the handle. "Go right in," she said. And something in her voice sounded almost warm, almost knowing. "He's been expecting you for a very long time." Expecting me for a long time. What did that mean? How long? Why? The questions piled up in my head, but before I could ask anything, she'd opened the door, and I was walking into an office that was larger than my childhood bedroom, larger than some apartments I'd looked at, walking toward a man standing by the window who turned when he heard me enter, and everything I thought I knew about my life, about my past, about my grandmother's promise, fell apart and reassembled into a truth I'd never imagined. Daniel Mercer was older than I'd expected, early 50s maybe, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers about successful entrepreneurs. His suit was impeccable. His office was the size of my entire apartment. He had that particular kind of presence that comes from years of making decisions that matter, of running things that are important. But what struck me most was his expression when he looked at me. He wasn't looking at a job candidate, wasn't assessing my qualifications or judging my appearance. He was looking at me like he'd been waiting for this specific moment for years, like my arrival meant something significant that I didn't understand yet. "Miss Chapman," he said, and his voice was warm, genuinely warm in a way that made my throat tight. "Please sit down." I sat in one of the leather chairs across from his massive desk, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling, my mind racing through possible explanations for why a CEO would personally interview me, whether my father had somehow orchestrated this as an elaborate humiliation, whether this was all about to collapse into another lesson about my place in the world. "Before we discuss the position," Daniel Mercer said, walking to a safe built into the wall behind his desk, a vintage Mosler with brass fittings and a combination lock that he spun with practiced ease, "I need to give you something." He pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with red wax that had darkened to amber over time. The kind of envelope you see in movies about inheritances and secrets and things hidden in libraries. He carried it carefully, reverently, like it was fragile and precious and important. And when he placed it on the desk in front of me, I saw the handwriting, elegant, flowing, unmistakably my grandmother's script. The envelope was addressed in her hand, to be opened only when Margaret Hayes has passed away and her granddaughter Sarah Chapman comes for an interview at Mercer Holdings. The date beneath those words was from 15 years ago, when I was 11 years old, when I was still young enough to believe my father loved me, when I had no idea what kind of prison was being built around my future. "Your grandmother," Daniel said softly, sitting in the chair beside me rather than behind his desk, creating an intimacy that felt deliberate and important, was the first person who ever believed in me. 20 years ago I was nobody, just a kid with a business degree and a plan, and no money. Every bank in the state had turned me down for a loan. Every investor had laughed me out of their office. I was about to give up, about to take a job at my father's hardware store and forget about my dreams, and then Margaret Hayes walked into my life. He paused, looking at the envelope like it held secrets he'd kept for decades. She wrote me a check for $200,000, he said, didn't ask for collateral, didn't demand controlling interest, just believed in what I was trying to build, and she made me promise one thing, just one condition for her investment. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stare at that envelope with my grandmother's handwriting, at the date that proved she'd planned this when I was barely old enough to understand what planning meant. She said, Daniel continued, someday a young woman named Sarah Chapman will need a job. She might apply to your company. She will apply to your company. And when she does, you'll know because I've set up a system to alert you. When that day comes, when she walks through your door, you give her this envelope. You make sure she's safe. You make sure she has options her father can't control. I set up a flag in our HR system 15 years ago. He said, your name, your social security number, your date of birth. Any application that came in with your information would immediately notify me. The moment your resume hit our database 2 weeks ago, I was alerted. I've been waiting for you, Sarah. I've been waiting for 15 years to keep the promise I made to the woman who changed my life. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the envelope. Tears were blurring my vision, making the wax seal swim and distort. She knew, I whispered. 15 years ago, she knew this would happen. She knew what kind of man your father was, Daniel said gently. She knew he would try to control you, try to trap you, try to make you dependent and desperate and willing to accept whatever terms he offered, and she couldn't stop him directly, couldn't change who he was or protect you from him while she was alive, but she could give you an escape route. She could build you a door he didn't know existed. I broke the wax seal with trembling fingers, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples, in my fingertips. Inside the envelope were 3 items that would change everything, that would reveal exactly how far my grandmother's love had reached across time to save me. And when I saw what she'd left, when I understood what she'd done, I realized that my father's satisfaction at that hotel restaurant, his certainty that he'd broken me, his confidence that I had no options, it was all built on lies. Built on not knowing that his dead mother-in-law had outsmarted him 15 years before the war even started. And now sitting in this office with Daniel Mercer watching me with patient knowing eyes, I was about to discover that I'd never been as powerless as my father had made me believe, that the weapon I needed had been waiting for me all along, and that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. The first item I pulled from the envelope was a letter, handwritten on cream-colored stationery that felt thick and expensive under my fingers, the kind of paper that was meant to last, meant to survive decades in a safe waiting for this exact moment. And when I unfolded it and saw my grandmother's elegant script flowing across the pages, my vision blurred with tears that I couldn't hold back anymore. My dearest Sarah, the letter began. If you're reading this, then I've left this world, and you've found your way to Daniel Mercer exactly as I planned. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to give you this myself. Sorry I couldn't see the woman you've become, but I need you to understand why I did what I did, why I spent years preparing for a future I hoped would never come but knew in my heart was inevitable. I watched your mother marry Robert Chapman when she was 23 years old, watched her transform from my bright, curious daughter into someone I barely recognized, someone who bent herself into shapes that weren't natural just to keep peace, just to avoid his anger, just to survive in a marriage that was slowly eroding who she was. I saw the signs from the beginning, the control disguised as concern, the criticism disguised as guidance, the way he made her smaller and smaller until she disappeared into the role he'd written for her. I begged Diane to leave, offered her money, offered her a place to stay, offered her everything I had if she would just walk away from a man who was destroying her, but she refused. She'd invested too much. She said she loved him. She said she could fix him if she just tried harder. She said, and I watched my daughter choose a prison over freedom because leaving felt more terrifying than staying. I couldn't save her, Sarah, no matter how hard I tried, but I swore to myself and to God that I would save you. From the moment you were born, I saw something in you that terrified your father, a spark he couldn't control, a will he couldn't bend. You questioned him when your mother never did. You dreamed beyond the boundaries he tried to build around you. You wanted more than the life he designed, and I knew with absolute certainty that one day he would try to break you for it, would try to punish you for being exactly what I'd always hoped you'd be: strong, independent, unwilling to settle for less than you deserved. So I built you an insurance policy. I built you a way out that he couldn't see coming, couldn't prevent, couldn't destroy no matter how hard he tried. 20 years ago, I met a young man named Daniel Mercer, brilliant, ambitious, ethical in a way that's rare in business. He had a vision for a financial services company that would operate with transparency and integrity, that would put clients first instead of profits. Every bank had turned him down, every investor had said no. And I knew that. A kind of rejection. Knew what it felt like to have good ideas dismissed because you didn't fit someone's narrow definition of what success looked like. I wrote him a check for $200,000. My investment became the foundation of what Mercer Holdings is today, but I didn't put those shares in my name. Sarah, I put them in yours. I created a trust when you were 6 years old that held 8% of Daniel's company in your name, legally, irrevocably, protected by documents your father never knew existed, structured to remain hidden until either I died or you came to this company seeking employment, whichever came first. By now, if Daniel has been even half as successful as I believed he would be, those shares are worth more than enough money to build your own life, to escape whatever trap your father has built, to be truly free in a way your mother never was. Use that money wisely, invest it, grow it, build something that belongs to you and only you, something no one can take or control or use as leverage to make you compliant. But more than the money, more than the financial security, I wanted you to know this. You don't owe anyone your obedience. You don't owe anyone your dreams. You don't owe anyone your future just because they share your blood or gave you life. Family is supposed to be the people who help you become who you're meant to be, not the people who punish you for trying. And if your family can't do that, if they try to make you smaller to make themselves feel bigger, then you have my permission to walk away. You have my blessing to choose yourself. You have my love supporting you, even though I can't be there to tell you in person. I am so proud of you, Sarah. Even though I can't see what you've accomplished, even though I don't know what challenges you've faced, I know you survived them. I know you're reading this, which means you didn't give up, didn't surrender, didn't let him win. And that's all I ever wanted, for you to keep fighting until you found the door I built for you. Live free, my darling girl. Live without apology. Live without the weight of other people's expectations crushing you into shapes that aren't yours. That's all I ever wanted for you. That's why I did this. Now go build something beautiful. All my love, forever and always, Grandma. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed. Couldn't stop sobbing. All the grief I'd suppressed for 3 years came pouring out in that CEO's office while Daniel Mercer sat quietly beside me, not offering empty platitudes, not telling me it would be okay, just being present while I fell apart and put myself back together in the space of 5 minutes. The second item in the envelope was a certificate, official, notarized, bearing the Mercer Holdings logo and a date from 20 years ago. I scanned the text through blurry eyes and felt the room tilt on its axis. Certificate of Stock Ownership. The document read, Sarah Marie Chapman, beneficiary, 8% founding stake, Mercer Holdings LLC, established in trust by Margaret Hayes, irrevocable and absolute. I stared at those words, read them again and again, trying to make my brain accept what my eyes were seeing. I don't understand, I whispered. 8% of. Daniel leaned forward, his voice gentle but clear. When your grandmother invested in my company 20 years ago, she didn't want the shares in her name. She said she was too old to worry about building wealth, that she had everything she needed, but she wanted to invest in my success and in your future simultaneously. So she structured the investment as a trust with you as the sole beneficiary. The shares have always been yours, Sarah, since you were 6 years old, legally, completely, irrevocably yours. But why didn't anyone tell me? Your grandmother designed the trust to remain confidential until specific conditions were met, he said, either her death or your application to this company. She wanted to make sure no one could pressure you about the money, couldn't manipulate you with knowledge of it, couldn't take it from you or convince you to give it away. She wanted it to exist as a safety net you didn't know about until the moment you needed it most. And my father, I started to say. Never knew, Daniel finished. The shares are held through a legal entity. Your name doesn't appear in any public filings. There was no way for him to discover them. Your grandmother made absolutely certain of that. The third item in the envelope was a small leather journal, worn soft with age, the pages yellowed and delicate. I opened it carefully and found entries in my grandmother's handwriting spanning decades, dates and observations, and careful documentation of things I'd never known she was tracking. October 1998. The first entry read, Robert screamed at Diane for 20 minutes because dinner was late, called her incompetent and worthless. Diane apologized and cried. I watched my daughter accept abuse as though she deserved it. I see now what kind of man he is. March 2002. Robert refused to pay for Sarah's piano lessons, said they were a waste of money for a girl who would just get married anyway. Diane didn't argue. I paid for the lessons secretly and told the teacher to tell Sarah it was a scholarship. June 2008. Robert explicitly forbade Sarah from applying to out-of-state colleges, said women don't need expensive education, said her place is at home until she finds a husband. I see him building a cage around my granddaughter, and I cannot stand by silently anymore. Page after page, year after year, my grandmother had been watching, documenting, building a case against my father that she'd kept secret, that she'd preserved as evidence of exactly why she needed to prepare an escape route for me. She'd seen it all coming, had predicted his cruelty with perfect accuracy, and had spent years quietly preparing to save me from it. Your grandmother knew, Daniel said quietly, exactly what kind of man your father is. She couldn't stop him while she was alive, couldn't change him or protect you directly, but she could do this. She could give you resources he couldn't access, couldn't control, couldn't take away, and she could make sure that when you needed help the most, when you were at your lowest, when you thought you had no options, you'd find out that you'd been a stakeholder in a successful company since childhood. I looked up at him through tears, my hands shaking as I held documents that represented freedom, that represented my grandmother's love reaching across time and death to save me. The shares, I managed to say. What are they worth? Daniel pulled up something on his computer, turned the screen so I could see spreadsheets and charts and numbers that made my head spin. At current valuation, he said, your 8% stake is worth approximately $2.6 million. The world stopped. My breath stopped. Time itself seemed to freeze in that moment. $2.6 million. I'd been scrubbing toilets for minimum wage while sitting on a fortune I didn't know existed. I'd been accepting humiliation and poverty and my father's cruelty while holding shares in a company worth more than his construction business, more than his house, more than everything he'd used to control me. You're not just an applicant, Daniel said gently. You're a founding shareholder. You're one of the people who made this company possible. And if you want the senior financial analyst position we discussed, it's yours, but you don't need this job. Sarah, you don't need any job. You have enough money to do whatever you want. Go wherever you want, be whoever you want. Your grandmother made sure of that. I sat in that chair trying to process what I was learning, trying to understand that my entire reality had just shifted, that every rejection, every humiliation, every moment of desperation had been built on a lie, on not knowing that I'd never been as powerless as my father had made me believe. There's something else you should know, Daniel said. Your father called me this morning, about 2 hours before you arrived. My stomach clenched. Of course he did. He told me the same story he's apparently told everyone else, that you're a thief, that you stole from your family, that you can't be trusted with money, that I shouldn't hire you under any circumstances. He was very convincing, very confident, clearly expecting me to thank him for the warning and send you away. And you? I asked, barely breathing. I listened to his entire speech, Daniel said, and then I pulled out the journal your grandmother left me, the one documenting his behavior over 30 years. I looked at the certificate proving you've been a shareholder since you were 6. I reviewed the trust documents showing how carefully your grandmother structured everything to protect you. And then I looked at my calendar and realized that this man, your father, just tried to slander and sabotage a founding shareholder of my company. A small smile crossed Daniel's face, something almost predatory. I don't think he's accustomed to that kind of miscalculation. He doesn't know, I said, about the shares, about any of this. No. And that's exactly how your grandmother wanted it. The trust was sealed, completely confidential. There's no public record, no paper trail he could have followed. He made that call this morning thinking he was destroying a helpless daughter, thinking he was ruining just another job prospect. He has no idea what's actually coming. What's coming? I asked. Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his hands thoughtfully. Next week, Mercer Holdings hosts its annual charity gala. It's our biggest event of the year. 500 guests, clients, investors, business leaders, politicians, media coverage. Your father will be there. He's been trying to network his way into contracts with us for months. He seems to think his construction company would make a good partner. I've been politely declining his advances, but he's persistent. He's definitely on the guest list. I felt my heart start to race, understanding dawning. I'd like to introduce you at the gala, Daniel said, as our new senior financial analyst, a position you're more than qualified for, and as a founding shareholder of the company, publicly, officially, in front of everyone, including your father. I want to give you the opportunity to stand in the truth, to let the world see who you really are, to let your father's lies collapse under the weight of reality. I thought about my father standing in a room full of influential people learning that his daughter, the one he'd tried to destroy, the one he'd humiliated in a hotel restaurant, the one he'd forced to scrub toilets, owned a piece of a company worth billions, owned enough shares to never need him again, owned the freedom he'd spent 2 years trying to steal. But I need to know something first, Daniel said, his voice serious. Is this what you want? Do you want that confrontation? Do you want him to know? Because I can structure this differently if you prefer. I can keep your shareholding confidential, can announce you as an employee without mentioning the ownership. I can protect you from that exposure, if that's what you need. I thought about it for a long moment, thought about revenge, about humiliation, about whether I wanted to become someone who enjoyed watching their father suffer. I don't want revenge, I said slowly. I don't want to hurt him just to see him hurt. That's not who I want to be. Daniel nodded, understanding. Your grandmother said you'd say something like that. But I continued, I do want the truth. I want people to know that I'm not a thief, that I didn't fail, that I survived something deliberately designed to destroy me. I want to stand in front of everyone who believed his lies and show them reality, not to punish him, but to free myself from his story. Then let's do exactly that, Daniel said, and he extended his hand. Welcome to Mercer Holdings, Sarah Chapman. It's an honor to finally meet you. I shook his hand, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. I felt hope. I felt power. I felt like maybe my grandmother had been right all along. That knowledge is freedom, and no one can take what you know, what you understand, what you fought to become. My father had tried to bury me, but he didn't know that my grandmother had planted me like a seed. And now I was about to grow into something he couldn't control, couldn't diminish, couldn't pretend. Didn't exist, and next week at that gala, in front of everyone who mattered, he was going to learn exactly how badly he'd miscalculated, exactly how completely he'd lost, and exactly what it meant to underestimate a woman who'd survived him. The week between my meeting with Daniel Mercer and the charity gala felt like living in 2 realities simultaneously. In one reality, I was still Sarah Chapman who cleaned hotel rooms and lived in her childhood bedroom. In the other reality, I was a founding shareholder of a billion-dollar company who owned enough wealth to never worry about money again. And the disconnect between those 2 versions of my life was so extreme that I kept touching the documents Daniel had given me, kept checking that they were real, that I hadn't hallucinated the entire thing in a desperate fever dream. Daniel's team had arranged everything with efficiency that felt surreal, a furnished apartment in the city, nothing ostentatious but clean and safe and mine, a bank account with an advance on my first year's salary as senior financial analyst, access to a corporate attorney who would help me navigate the financial implications of suddenly owning $2.6 million in company shares, and most importantly, a stylist who would make sure I looked like I belonged at a gala where the cheapest dress probably cost more than I used to make in 6 months. I gave my notice at the Willow Creek Inn on a Tuesday morning, walked into Linda's office with 2 weeks' notice in an envelope and an explanation I'd practiced a dozen times. I got a job, I told her simply, a real one in the city. I start next week. Linda looked at me for a long moment, then smiled in a way that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with genuine happiness. I knew you would, she said. Knew from the moment you walked in here that you didn't belong scrubbing toilets. Go get your life back, Sarah, you earned it. I didn't tell her about the shares, didn't tell her about the inheritance, didn't tell her that I was about to walk into a gala and publicly destroy my father's narrative. Some things were too big to explain, too complicated to share. I just hugged her and thanked her for being one of the only people in 2 years who treated me like I had value. I didn't go home that week, didn't tell my parents I was leaving, didn't pack my things from my childhood bedroom, just left everything exactly where it was, like a ghost who'd walked away from a haunting. I'd go back eventually with movers and boxes, but I didn't want to see my father's face, didn't want to hear his threats or my mother's pleas or Tyler's mockery. I just wanted to disappear from their lives as completely as they'd tried to erase me from employment. The night before the gala, I stood in my new apartment looking at the dress the stylist had selected, a floor-length gown in deep emerald green that somehow made me look both powerful and elegant. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth, just sophisticated beauty that spoke quietly about belonging in spaces where important things happened. I'd never worn anything that expensive, never imagined I would, never thought I'd be someone who needed clothes that cost thousands of dollars. I thought about my grandmother, about her promise, about how she'd seen this moment coming 15 years before I could even imagine needing rescue, and I wished so desperately that she could be there, could see me walk into that gala, could see her plan work exactly as she designed it, could see me finally free. The Grand Meridian Hotel Ballroom was exactly what you'd expect for a charity gala hosted by one of the region's most successful financial firms, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than houses, a live jazz quartet playing in one corner, waiters in formal attire circulating with champagne, and hors d'oeuvres that looked like tiny works of art. 500 people an evening, where that represented more combined wealth than some small countries, and somewhere in that crowd, completely unaware of what was about to happen, was my father. I arrived 30 minutes after the event started, exactly as Daniel and I had planned. I wanted my family already settled, already comfortable, already convinced this was just another networking event where they could work connections and make deals. I checked my reflection one last time in the hallway mirror, touched the documents in my clutch that proved everything I was about to say, and walked into a room that was about to witness my father's entire narrative collapse. I spotted them almost immediately. Dad in his best tuxedo looking confident and powerful, Mom in a designer gown with her practiced smile, Tyler checking his phone looking bored as usual. They were near the bar talking to some business associates. My father's laugh carried across the room, that booming sound of a man who thought he owned every space he occupied. They had no idea I was there. No idea I was anywhere near the city. No idea that in 15 minutes their entire understanding of reality was about to shatter. Daniel found me near the entrance, looked at me with an expression that was part pride and part anticipation. "Ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded, as ready as I'll ever be. He took my arm, not romantic but protective, and guided me toward the small stage at the front of the ballroom where a podium stood with a microphone. The crowd gradually quieted as Daniel stepped up, 500 faces turning toward him with the kind of attention you give someone who controls significant resources and makes decisions that affect your wealth. "Good evening, everyone." Daniel's voice carried across the ballroom with practiced ease. "Thank you for joining us for Mercer Holdings' 20th Annual Charity Gala. Tonight we celebrate not just our company's success, but our commitment to the community and to the values that have guided us since our founding." He spoke for a few minutes about the charity the gala supported, about donations and impact and gratitude, standard speech material that I barely heard because my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone in the room could hear it. And then his tone shifted, became more personal, more significant. "Before we continue with tonight's program," Daniel said, "I want to introduce someone very special, someone who represents the values this company was built on, integrity, perseverance, and the courage to stand alone when necessary." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me as Daniel gestured for me to join him. I walked carefully in heels that were higher than anything I'd ever worn, climbed the 3 steps to the stage, took my place beside Daniel, and for the first time I let myself look directly at my father. His face had gone from confident to confused. He was squinting at me like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Couldn't process why his daughter was on stage at a gala he was attending. Mom's hand had flown to her mouth. Tyler had actually looked up from his phone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel continued, "please welcome Mercer Holdings' newest senior financial analyst and someone very dear to this company's history, Miss Sarah Chapman." Polite applause rippled through the crowd, but my family wasn't clapping. They were frozen. 3 statues in evening were trying to understand what was happening, trying to figure out if this was some kind of mistake, some cosmic coincidence that their disgraced daughter was on stage at an event they were attending. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, my voice steadier than I'd expected. It's an honor to be here, an honor to work for a company that values people's potential over other people's opinions. And then Daniel said the words that would change everything. Before I continue, I need to clarify something about Sarah's relationship to this company. She's not just an employee, she's a founding shareholder. She's owned 8% of Mercer Holdings since she was 6 years old, placed in trust by her grandmother Margaret Hayes, who was our first investor, our first believer, the person who made everything we've built possible. The room erupted in whispers, 500 people processing what they'd just heard, but I was only watching 3 people. My father's face had gone from confused to white to red, the color of someone whose blood pressure was spiking dangerously. Mom looked like she might faint. Tyler was staring at his phone like he could Google whether this was real. Daniel wasn't finished. Sarah's grandmother invested in this company 20 years ago, he said, and she structured that investment as a trust for her granddaughter because she understood something that many people forget, that true family doesn't control, true family empowers, true family builds doors instead of walls. Margaret Hayes built a door for Sarah that no one could close, and tonight Sarah walks through it. My father started moving toward the stage, his face purple now, his movements aggressive. I saw security notice, saw them start to converge, but before they could reach him, Daniel held up a hand. Mr. Chapman, he said, his voice carrying enough authority to stop my father mid-stride. I believe you called me recently with concerns about Sarah, concerns you shared with many employers in your community, concerns that prevented her from finding work for 2 years despite graduating with honors and having impeccable qualifications. The ballroom had gone completely silent, 500 people watching this confrontation unfold like it was theater, like it was entertainment. But for me, it was everything. It was 2 years of humiliation being exposed. It was truth finally being given a voice. You told me Sarah was a thief, Daniel continued. You told me she couldn't be trusted with money. You told me I should not hire her under any circumstances, and I listened to your entire warning. And then I reviewed the documentation her grandmother left, documentation spanning 30 years detailing your pattern of control and manipulation. And then I looked at the certificate proving Sarah has been a shareholder since childhood, and I realized something interesting. He paused. Let the silence build, Mr. Chapman. You just attempted to slander a founding shareholder of my company. You tried to destroy the reputation of someone who technically owns part of the organization you've been trying to partner with for months. And I have to admit, I've never experienced anything quite like that level of miscalculation. My father was shaking now. Whether from rage or fear or humiliation, I couldn't tell. Maybe all 3. Mom had grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back, trying to prevent whatever explosion was coming, but he yanked away from her. This is insane, he said, his voice too loud, too desperate. She's a thief. She stole from me. You can't just believe some documents from a dead woman who is senile. My grandmother wasn't senile, I said, stepping to the microphone, my voice calm and clear, and I didn't steal anything. You gave me a credit card for textbooks. I bought textbooks, and then you used that as an excuse to destroy my career for 2 years because I refused to work for you for free, because I wanted independence, because I thought I had the right to build my own life. That's not, my father started. I have the receipts, I interrupted, every textbook purchase, every payment I made to pay you back. Every cent documented and time-stamped. I also have my employment records showing 2 years of minimum wage work at jobs you couldn't control, 2 years of surviving despite your best efforts to break me, and I have my grandmother's journal documenting 30 years of your behavior, your cruelty, your need to control everyone around you, especially women, especially your daughter. The crowd was completely silent now. Some people had their phones out recording. This would be on social media within minutes, would spread through business networks within hours, would destroy my father's reputation the way he destroyed mine. But I hadn't come here for revenge. I'd come here for truth. I don't hate you, Dad, I said, and I meant it, found that I actually meant it. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I spent 2 years being called a thief by people who believed your story, and I need them to know the truth, not your version, the actual documented factual truth. My father stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, unable to form words, unable to defend himself because there was no defense. 500 witnesses had just watched him be exposed as a liar, as a manipulator, as a father who tried to destroy his own daughter. We're leaving, he finally said, grabbing Mom's arm roughly. Tyler, let's go. We don't need to stay here and be insulted. He turned toward the exit, but Daniel's voice stopped him one more time. Mr. Chapman, just so you're aware, Sarah's grandmother's investment has appreciated significantly over 20 years. Her 8% stake is currently valued at approximately $2.6 million. Your daughter doesn't need your approval or your permission or your help. She never did. You just made her think she did. And that's the real crime here. My family left without another word, walked out of that ballroom while 500 people watched, while phones recorded, while the truth they'd tried to bury finally surfaced like a body that won't stay underwater, and I stood on that stage feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, not satisfaction, just this quiet sense of being seen, of being known, of finally standing in my own truth without apology or shame. The applause started slowly, one person, then another, then a wave of sound that filled the ballroom, not because I'd humiliated my father, but because people understood what they'd witnessed, someone surviving something designed to destroy them, someone refusing to disappear, someone standing up after being knocked down repeatedly, and that resonated with more people than I'd expected, because apparently a lot of us have stories about surviving the people who were supposed to protect us. After the gala ended, after the crowd dispersed, after the media coverage started spreading across social media, I stood in my new apartment looking at the documents my grandmother had left me, her letter, the certificate, the journal, and I finally understood what she'd been trying to teach me all along. That love isn't control, that family isn't obligation, that sometimes the people who truly care about you are the ones who build you doors instead of walls, who give you options instead of demands, who trust you to find your own way even when they can't be there to see it. My phone started ringing the next morning, reporters wanting interviews, business contacts wanting to network, distant relatives suddenly interested in reconnecting, people who'd rejected my job applications 2 years ago now claiming they'd always seen my potential. I ignored most of them, blocked the ones who'd been particularly cruel, and focused on building a life that belonged to me. My father's construction companies started losing contracts within weeks, partners who didn't want to be associated with someone who'd publicly been exposed as a liar, clients who'd heard the recordings from the gala, business associates who decided Robert Chapman's reputation was too damaged to be worth the association. I didn't celebrate his failures, didn't track his downfall. Just let karma do what karma does when truth finally catches up with lies. Mom called once, her voice small and broken, asking if we could talk, asking if I could forgive them, asking if maybe we could be a family again, and I told her the truth. I forgive you, Mom, because carrying anger only hurts me, but I can't have a relationship with people who see me as something to control rather than someone to love. Maybe someday that will change, but not today, not soon. Tyler sent a single text 3 months later, an apology that sounded like it had been written by a PR consultant. Generic and empty. I didn't respond. Some relationships aren't worth saving. Some bridges are better burned. I still work at Mercer Holdings, still live in the city, still own 8% of a company that's grown even more valuable. But the money, as incredible as it is, wasn't what saved me. What saved me was knowing that someone somewhere had loved me enough to plan for my freedom 15 years before I needed it, had believed in me enough to invest in my future when I was too young to understand what investment meant, had seen me clearly enough to know exactly what kind of escape route I would need. I keep Grandma Margaret's letter in my desk at work, take it out sometimes when I'm having a hard day, when imposter syndrome tries to convince me I don't belong, when I wonder if I'm making the right choices, and I read her words. Live free, live without apology, live without the weight of other people's expectations. And I remember that freedom isn't something you're given, it's something you build, something you fight for, something you refuse to surrender even when surrender seems easier than survival. If you're watching this and you're trapped by someone who's supposed to love you, if you're being controlled or diminished or made to feel worthless by family, I want you to know something. You're not crazy, you're not weak, you're not ungrateful, you're surviving, and survival is enough until you find your door, and you will find your door. Maybe it won't be an inheritance, maybe it won't be dramatic or public, maybe it will just be a job in a different city or a friend who believes you or a moment of clarity where you finally understand that you deserve better, but you will find it if you keep looking, if you keep fighting, if you refuse to believe the story they're telling about who you are. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. Thank you for witnessing what happened. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who should have protected us. And if this resonated with you, if you recognized your own story and mine, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And hey, from our stats, we've got way more viewers than subscribers. If this story meant something to you, if it helped you feel less alone, kindly join our community by hitting that subscribe button. We're building something here, a space where people can share these stories without shame, where survival gets celebrated instead of dismissed, where truth matters more than comfortable lies. Check the description for more stories like this one. Stories about people who refused to stay broken, who built lives from nothing, who found strength in places they didn't know existed. Because you need to know you're not alone in this. You need to know that other people survived, and so can you. And you need to know that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's living well, it's building something beautiful from the ashes. It's standing in your truth so completely that lies can't touch you anymore. My grandmother taught me that, and now I'm teaching you, freedom is possible, escape is real, and you deserve both. Now go build your door.